my name's Alan Butler. I own a business called Old Friends Antiques. It's actually called Old Friends Furniture now because antiques don't sell that well anymore. We deal more in the what's called the mid-century modern and Danish modern era, things from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. I grew up selling antiques for 40 years ago, and I loved them, but all of a sudden about year 2000, it started to change. It went into this mid-century mode, and I would always turn my nose up on it. I never particularly liked it. I grew up with the stuff with my parents, and I thought, oh, who wants that stuff? Well, all of a sudden, lo and behold, I want that stuff. My wife always liked it, and thought she was a bit crazy, but part of the reason is because I was starting to sell it, making money. That it helps when you do that to love it. But now our whole house, my whole life seems to be mid-century modern. So I really go for that stuff, obviously. In the business, like I say, 40 years we've been doing repair, refinish, reupholster, retrofit, etc. There are things we cannot do, but I've had a real good reputation, honest with people. At least I think I am. Got 5-star ratings on a lot of these endless sites that rate people. I like the business. I'm dealing with a lot of decent people. I rarely have problems, and of course we do occasionally, but I just take care of it, And people kind of respect that, and they know, like I said, I have a good reputation, I think, and that goes a long way.
We have young people watching our shows or, read about us and read about you.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to them? Now there's a lot of fights and the economic is not that good. It's difficult to find jobs. What would be the recommendation that you have?
Well, either to pursue a professional career if you can, but that's, I don't know, that can be rather taxing, of course, but rather single-minded. Maybe you're very gifted at one thing, but you don't know a whole lot about the rest of the world because you're so entrenched in your one pursuit. Like I have quite a few physicians, even older physicians, who were med school was so tough, and their whole it was all so hard that socially they're maybe not too with it, but they're very good at what they do. But their life and their other aspects are lacking, at least in my thoughts. That's not true of all of them, of course. My doctor, who I actually grew up with, he's great. He's a normal guy who happens to be very smart and keeps me, in check. As far as what to do, I don't know. I think a lot of people will agree with this. Pursuing something where you actually do something physical or the like is better than, how many lawyers do we need, for crying out loud? How many computer programmers? I guess we need a lot of them, but that we do need people who can fix things, who can do electricity, plumbing, manual technical skills where they can actually fix things, or in my case, fix furniture, save trees, etc. So that's what I recommend. If you're in college, is so expensive too. Go into debt. I read all these articles and hear these documentaries about how these kids come out of college owing $50,000, $500,000. It just depends, and what a burden that is to start a career when you're off on that. I do see in in society in general such a disparity in income. There's the people who just will come in and say, how much is that? I'll say that's $3,000. Okay, when can you deliver it? Another person will come in at $3,000. They about drop dead on the floor. They just can't imagine it would be that much. And I'm sorry about that, but that is the way the world is. It used to be much less so. There's always been a lot of wealthy people and a whole lot of poor people, but it's so much more dramatic now. And is it getting more so? I think so, but I don't know. I went to school, I moved to California in 1968, and in those days, school was free, for crying out loud. The biggest thing was books for tuition was hardly nothing, even in that era. Dollars meant a lot more, but it was very inexpensive to go to school. So I took 6 years to go 4 years of school. I just had what it meant that I had a good time in college, liberal arts degree, a lot of girls in college. I took a lot of those classes. That was nice to do. And then I just got out and not sure what to do. I had all kinds of jobs during that time. I worked since I was 14, and jobs were easy to get back then. And there was never any problem getting a job, especially part-time, going to school. My father was a builder, a contractor, did residential stuff. And I worked with him a bit. I mean, he's a wonderful man. We couldn't work together, which was fine. But my parents are both good to me, and my sister as well. I have a younger sister. They lent me money, $2,000 I remember back in 74, 75 to start a business. And $2,000 was quite a bit of money then, but a relatable sum, okay? So I said, well, I'm going to open up a store, I think. I think I could do that. And they said, okay. I had this practice. It was my dad's observation. Well, yeah, you kind of have some skills from just helping me out for all these years. Since you were a kid, you know what the difference between a hammer and a screwdriver is, for instance. Didn't know what computers were back then, but I do know that. So that kind of got me into the business, and it was the right time and right place. I opened in 75, and antiques were really starting to come on. Back then, the expressions were, if it's old, it's gold. And yeah, we used to just sell things like crazy. We'd fix things up. That was our hook. We'd be able to fix things up. I did it all to beginning for years, I did it all myself. Then hired one college guy, and then another and another. And I mean, that's built and grown. So we'd like to think of it as a professional shop. There are certain things we cannot do. I think I mentioned that before, but we just tell people, sorry, we can't do it. So that's a story of that. My father, I saw this building, and it was $300 a month to rent. Pretty decent sized building. And I said, well, but it was a lease option for $350. And I said, oh, Dad, I can't, $50, that's more, that's crazy. So they said, son, eat a few less pizzas. You should just do this. And I did, and that was one of the best decisions I've made, other than marrying my wife. And hear that, honey? Let's see. So that got me. I own the business. I own the building. No overhead to speak of in that regard. So, which I think I've said before, but that really helps me. She was a British citizen, born and raised in Shanghai, China, and my grandfather, who was a pretty magnanimous Irish guy, he was just loved people, had the gift of the gab, and a lot of smarts too. And he owned a bottling company. They sold a lot of British liquors and Schweppes and soft drinks like that. Had a whole factory, a bottling company, distributing ship, and he made a lot of money back then in Shanghai. The British community and the European community was rather large in Shanghai. It still is there too, in fact. But then in 1940, in the early 40s, or I guess no, it was the late 30s, Japan invaded. And they confiscated his factories, his homes, his vehicles. They confiscated everything. And they threw them into prison camp. My whole family was in prison camp. And they were there for 3.5 years. My mom was 14. So all those formative years, they're always formative when you're young, but from 14 to like 18, 19, she just had the camp. And there was a lot of people there, and she had teachers and things, and my mom's pretty smart too, but she never really had a formal education beyond that. Anyways, my dad was a GI. He came over. They were they were the ones who liberated these people, and they were treated okay in prison camp. It was families, mainly families, and they weren't brutal on them, but there were food shortages. They were eating maggots sometimes because the Japanese were hitting the end of the line there towards the end of the war, so they had nothing to feed their own soldiers. But they had a good camp commandant who was actually educated in San Francisco, and he had a lot of empathy for these British people who were they didn't do anything bad, but we were just at war with Japan. In fact, my grandfather, showing a bit of his character, after the war, he tried looking that commandant up because he knew he was a good guy, and he wanted to help him, and they couldn't find him. And my grandfather still had connections, let's say, after the war. So we had a lot of channels to try to find this guy, and whether he was killed or made it, I don't know. But anyways, that was a sad thing. He after the war, then he worked for an organization called UNRWA, which actually ran supplies up the river from Shanghai. I don't know the name of that river. I can't recall the name of that river. And brought supplies to all these poor people who were up there who were just devastated by the war. And he did that for a couple of years, and that made no money doing that. That was just what he did. But anyways, my dad came along, met my mom. There were tens of thousands of GIs. How she picked him, I don't know, but I'm glad she did. because they got to know each other. They had a good, after the war was good times. He was an MP. They were able to just enjoy the country, you know, and America was king of the world then, so they were the prince and princess of Shanghai in that area. So then my dad moved to the States. They pledged to get married. Well, sure enough, he went first. My mom took the steamship to San Francisco. They reunited. Okay, then he took her back to Chicago. Quite a culture shock from Shanghai, and especially the winters. And met the parents. You know, they were a little nebulous, like, who is this woman? She's Chinese? Well, no, she's really British, but you know, she knows a whole lot about Chinese culture and people and food and traditions. I did as well. I grew up with them, obviously, and my dad glommed onto that pretty nicely. So I've been in Chinese markets and restaurants and clothing and whatever. I was immersed in the culture more or less for quite a while, so it's in my DNA, so to speak. No accent, but I have affinity for their style and architecture and so forth, and even Japanese too. It's just an interesting part of the world. My wife is interested in people's well-being, and I'm interested in how their house looks like and the furniture. So who's got the right priority on that? I don't know. I suspect she does. Fortunately, she doesn't care that much. She cares about this furniture and the look, but it's not on her priority list. So I get to do what I want with the house. I will take things home that I fall in love with, and she'll come home and say, "Didn't we have a table there? Or did we?" "Yeah, honey, but this one's better, isn't it?" And she'll say, "Okay, that's nice." You know, she just lets me do that. I give her own leeway too. You know, she has her own career. I will visit whenever I'm not feeling well or something hurts on me. I'll go stop by her ward, and I see these patients who are. I mean, they have one patient that has ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. You may know what that disease is. Your muscles slowly degenerate, and you can't move. Well, they've had this one guy for 12 going on or more years, and all he could do was move his eyes. So they communicated with him moving his eyes. They had all these charts on the wall with expressions, letters, numbers, and he would just look back and forth. Well, about a year ago, he couldn't move his eyes anymore, you know, and he's a prisoner. His brain is fine. He's trapped inside this body. And he's convinced now, I guess self-defense, that he just has the bad case of the flu. But he's terminal eventually. He's just an interesting guy. So my point being, when I feel kind of sickly or bad or want to complain and whine, I just go there and say, my sore elbow is nothing compared to what a lot of these people have, head injuries and the like. So that chemistry between us usually works pretty well, you know, as well as any married couples can be. We're actually, I should say, well above average in that. We're quite happy, have a nice home, a nice life, really.